I was laying cornflowers on a grave. I technically didn't have a right to claim when a man's voice slid in behind me like a cold blade. "What are you doing at my wife's grave?" he said. And I remember not turning right away because my hands were still on the flowers, and the mist was sticking to everything: the stone, my coat, the back of my throat. When I finally looked up, I saw him tall in navy cashmere, jaw tight, a little girl clutching a star umbrella peeking from behind his leg, and a woman in a bone-colored coat staring at me like I'd tracked mud across marble. My name is Maya Cole. I grew up learning not to unpack foster homes. Short stays, a photo in a manila folder with 2 toddlers and the same face on the back in shaky ink. It said, Iris and Maya, age 2. The stone in front of me read, Iris Whitaker, and I told the man I think Iris was my sister. He didn't flinch, not then, but the little girl whispered, Daddy, she looks like Mommy. And the woman laughed that dry laugh people use when they think they've already figured you out. Cute. Found a resemblance online and came to cash in at security. We'll handle it, she said. Then she stepped too close and hissed. You don't belong here, she pushed my heel. Slipped thorns, bit my palms. Yeah, that happened. The man grabbed her wrist and said, Sloan enough. I stood up with leaves stuck to my coat and blood beading on my hands and told him I wasn't there for money or a headline. I was there because sometimes a mirror feels like a question. The little girl touched one of the cornflowers and whispered, These were Mommy's favorite. And that more than anything I could have said made him pause. Bring what you have tomorrow noon, my office, he said. I asked if he believed me, and he said, I don't know, but I want to see. I walked into his glass tower the next day, smelling like citrus polish and money, and sat across from Grant Whitaker. Yes, that. Whitaker, I laid out my life on the table like a deck of cards. The twin photo, the intake sheet with my name typed crooked, a social worker's note that said, siblings separated at intake at family request, no contact authorized. He picked up the photo and stared like it was a trick. You could be her mirror, he said, and I said, I know. Then he did what men with power do when they don't know what to feel. He turned to the window and made a plan, DNA. You, my daughter, and Iris's preserved record. If you're right, we'll know we did the swabs that afternoon. At a clinic squeezed between a dry cleaner and a pet bakery, Lena swung her legs and held a stuffed elephant. You could tell had soaked up a lot of tears. Sloan Kerr, the woman from the cemetery, didn't come. The results arrived fast. Rich men can make time behave 99. 9% identical twin matched to Iris Vale. Whitaker. Percent aunt to Lena. I didn't cry. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was a quiet finally on the phone. Grant didn't say, congratulations. He said Iris used to wake up crying, said she felt like half of her was missing. Then he hung up like we were both standing on a cliff, and neither of us had the shoes for it. I started going to the house not as family, but not as a stranger either, cutting pizza into squares, because Lena said triangles were drama. And one night Grant set down a leather journal like it might bite Iris's handwriting. Loopy and sure entries about a girl in her dreams, with her eyes and her laugh, waking up with a hole in her chest. The last page said, sometimes, I catch Lena looking at me like she knows maybe it's time to find the girl from my dreams. I traced those words with my thumb and thought she was reaching for me, you know what I mean? But the truth never just sits there and lets you collect it. It runs, it hides in the least surprising place, a file room painted, government gray under lights that buzz with a clerk who's seen everything. When I pulled the intake paperwork, I found a signature that changed the temperature in my body. Marjorie Kerr, the social worker who signed off on separating us, and below that, a neat line of intern inks. Kerr, Assistant Sloane's aunt, and Sloane herself. I didn't take photos rules, but I copied what I could and brought it to Grant. I watched his face go from disbelief to something like grief. With teeth, she's worked with me 8 years, he said. She was at my wife's funeral, and I said she was at my wife's grave. We didn't go on some messy rant online. We sent documents to a reporter who still asks follow-ups and thinks ink matters. The piece didn't name Sloan, but it named the practice sealed records, sanctioned separations, the kind of notes that make infants sound like liabilities. The comments section became a bonfire of old bracelets and Polaroids and first names. People had been told to forget the board, called Grant courageous and centered in truth, which is what boards say when the stock doesn't dip. And Sloan kept smiling in hallways like nothing had shifted, but her hand shook. In Grant's attic cedar and old holiday boxes, I found a plain black album, not Iris's curated life, just loose Polaroids, teen camp, a bumblebee costume, a Foster driveway chalked with hopscotch, and there next to Iris, a girl who wasn't me, with the exact same bones. A third face, my stomach fell through the floor at the kitchen table that night. I said it plain, Rant. We weren't twins, we were 3. He stared and didn't try to gaslight the sky. Blue, then we find her, he said. The state supervisor, who still remembered which drawers stick, slid me a thin folder intake name Jasmine Rose later used. Rosie, a dozen transfers, 1 note like a knife reassign under alias suppress sibling contact. A bookstore manager in Buffalo remembered a tall, quiet girl in a red hoodie who read philosophy on the floor for hours. And a women's shelter director said she sleeps in bed. It rains, so I waited for rain. She walked in soaked and hooded, and when she saw me, we both went still like mirrors, finally catching the same light. I'm Maya, I said. I think... No, I know I'm your sister. They said you were a dream, she said. They told me you didn't exist, I answered. She pulled a torn baby photo from her pocket. 3 newborns in a hospital crib, the corner ripped where a name used to be. I kept it even when I didn't know why she whispered. And just like that, something in both of us unclenched. You'd think the credits would roll, but the story had other plans. Sloane's aunt ran a glossy foundation and invited us to a gala, like she wanted a stage. Rosie wore the red flower denim jacket over a borrowed navy dress, like armor. We walked in steady. Sloane floated down the stairs in black silk and diamonds. Jasmine Rose, she said, tasting the syllables, or do you prefer whatever plays better in a headline? Jasmine. My sister said the name you tried to erase. Sloane stepped close and said she'd protected a fragile child from bad placements. I read my file, Rosie said. You paid for that language, and when Sloane hissed, you don't beat institutions, you exhaust them, I said. She doesn't need to win to be the truth. People around us pretended not to listen, but they were listening. The next morning, a hashtag I didn't create started rolling. Am Jasmine strangers pouring out childhoods in 4 lines. Then the archives fire hit the news. A state storage wing went up after midnight. Accelerant surgical burn, pre-2005 vaults, the exact years that held our paper blood. I tasted metal and thought this is what power does when you pull up floorboards, and Rosie, steady in the smoke, pulled an envelope from her coat. I requested copies last week. They mailed them to the shelter inside. There was a form stamped from Sloane's office, displacement, exception. Emergency transfer, reassign under alias to suppress sibling contact. We took it to our reporter, the 3rd. Expose ran like a fuse. Suddenly officials wanted audits. The city woke up like it smelled its own house burning. A warrant landed on Sloane's desk, obstruction, tampering, civil rights violations. And no, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt wrung out like a bell that still vibrates after the strike in the quiet. After we flew to a reform forum, and I told it straight. The grave, the shove, the file drawer, the rain. Then Rosie gripped the podium and said, "When I was 7, I disappeared, not from a map, but from a system that knew exactly where I was and chose to forget me. And the room made a sound I don't know how to name, like recognition with a pulse. The new beginning didn't come with fireworks. It came with keys to a renovated library on the south side and a sign that says, the Iris Vale Center. A place where the first question is, who do you love? Not what's your case number. A small bronze out front shows 3 girls holding hands, hair blown back like a storm, made them stronger. Lena glued glitter stars to the flyers and declared, pizza should be cut in squares for courage. Grant stood beside me with his hand on the small of my back, light enough to be a question. And Rosie wore a badge with her name and didn't flinch. We were there, breathing, not running. And still across the street that day, an older woman watched, not Sloane. Someone with that posture you see in offices where you're offered a brochure instead of a childhood. She didn't come over, didn't clap, just watched and left. Maybe she's nobody, maybe she's the next door we open. That's the argument I want from you. Not whether I had a right to lay flowers on a grave with a borrowed name, say what you want there. I can take it. But the bigger thing, the machine that chooses tidy over human and calls it care, was Sloane evil or efficient? Was what happened to us a crime or a policy? Should sealed records stay sealed to protect the living? Have you seen a system pick quiet over justice and ask you to be grateful? Tell me where you stand and where you're watching from, Hope. Found, if you've ever looked in a mirror and felt like you were searching for someone else, and if you believe truth belongs to the ones who go looking, hit like, subscribe, and leave your story below. I'll be reading.